We are at Mira Sushi, and today we're going to be talking about tataki, which, for those who are not familiar, is a pretty delicious way of serving sushi. What exactly is tataki?
Tataki is actually a cooking technique which involves quickly searing the outside of a protein and leaving the inside raw.
And so for a lot of people, they're used to seeing it on fish, but can you do tataki with other proteins as well?
Yeah, in reality, you could do it to almost any type of protein. Obviously, some proteins are better fully cooked than others. With that said, though, beef tataki is extremely popular in Japan and extremely popular in any Japanese restaurant, really.
And so obviously the most important thing here is ingredients, because of course a portion of this meat is always going to be raw.
Yes.
So tell me a little bit about sourcing for tatakis.
As far as sourcing ingredients, I think it's important to use high quality ingredients, but for this dish in specific, it is very important to use a premium cut specifically. Being that the piece of protein is going to be raw in the center, if you have things like connective tissue, silver skin, it'll really interfere with the eating experience. So you want to get a really nice cut of meat that is very fine fibered protein, that's very tender naturally already, that doesn't depend on the cooking process to tenderize it more.
When you have something that's kind of raw and cooked, how do you balance that with the other flavors in the dish?
In Japan, it's actually very common to pair it with some type of citrus soy dipping sauce. It, of course, doesn't end there, but because tataki is such a delicate cooking process, you generally want to stick with a delicate type of dipping sauce that won't mask the flavor and the texture of the original protein itself.
And let's talk about the cooking process, because I think, you know, if you've had tataki before, it's always about that perfect balance, like not cooked too much, still having that raw. So how do you make sure that you're getting the right raw to cooked ratio?
Yeah, that's actually that's exactly it. It's very important about the raw to cooked ratio. I think certain proteins require a different raw to cooked ratio than others. For example, for me, I personally feel that something like a filet mignon has much higher threshold of raw to cooked ratio because it's tender throughout, cooked or not. A tuna loin is very delicate all around. I think searing it too hard would actually take away from the protein itself. So you wouldn't want such a big or a very close ratio as far as raw to cooked on that one.
And then what about cooking equipment? You know, I think obviously high heat is important because you want to get that sear quickly. So what do people need if they want to test out tataki at home?
Fortunately for everybody at home, making tataki at home does not require any special stoves or equipment. It actually can be done with a simple saute pan and some conventional cooking oil, something preferably that's a neutral cooking oil.
Yeah, fair enough. So you're going to make us a tataki dish today. What are we making?
We are actually going to do a couple things. I have a filet mignon and I also have a prime cut of tuna loin that we're going to turn into tataki.
Amazing. So will you take us to the kitchen and show us the steps?
Let's do it. Now we're back in the kitchen and I'm going to show you the tataki technique. Most important is the type of cooking vessel that you're going to use. You do not want to use something with very tall sides. That'll actually trap in moisture. You want to get the pan hot and you want to sear your item. And if you have too much moisture, you won't get a good sear. The most popular one is tuna tataki. And I was speaking about you want to use a prime loin cut. That is a cut with very little silver skin and connective tissue. I preheated my pan with just some regular vegetable cooking oil because it is neutral and it won't impart flavor into the meat product. I'm going to put it in very quickly. It's going to sizzle and it's going to be very fast. It's just a quick sear. We do not want a very even cooked protein to raw protein ratio. It's just going to be very quick and easy. And that is literally it for something like tuna. Now, if we're doing something like a piece of beef, it's actually going to take more time to get it browned. If you were to brown this piece of tuna, the protein would get very tough and unpalatable. Anything that's a very prime, tender cut. We're going to go down with our protein. I would recommend no more than 30 to 40 seconds on each side. Our beef tataki is almost done, and before I conclude on the cooking process, I would like to mention that another technique that I really like to do with tataki is actually to take a piece of beef and freeze it. You can actually cook the meat much longer and get it much browner for almost a minute on each side, and we have a much darker caramelized product. You're still accomplishing the goal of making tataki by doing a quick sear, but there are other ways to impart even more flavor. Another tip that I like to give people when making tataki is cool the protein immediately, because the product will continue to cook even after it's taken off the pan. I have seen traditional Japanese chefs have an ice bath ready to submerge the product into the ice bath to get it quick right away. I found that I like to take a metal or glass tray and put it into a freezer or refrigerator beforehand so that it's extremely cold, and just rest the protein on that cold pan. After about 30-40 seconds, just flip it over. It'll cool it just as well, and most importantly is that it will retain all of its original flavor rather than submerging it in water. And what's the enemy of flavor? Water. We're gonna start with our tuna here. I'm cutting very small, I would say maybe even less than ½ centimeter thick. It's better sliced thin for a tataki because keep in mind you had cooked the outside of it, it's raw in the inside. You don't want to fight too much when you're biting into the product. Here I have some cut onions rinsed in cold water to eliminate the alkalinity. For my citrus component, I made yuzu pickles. And finally, we have our ponzu sauce, and that is tuna tataki. So here we have our strip steak, which was also cooked tataki style. I'm gonna cut it to roughly the same thickness. It's actually much more forgiving if you cut it even thinner than the tuna. Keep in mind, beef is a tougher protein than tuna, still tender. For beef tataki, I do something a little unconventional. I actually salt the protein directly before adding anything else. It's not as delicate of a protein, so it needs something robust to go along with it. I am also going to top this with our sliced onions. And for this one, I'm going to top it with crispy garlic and jazz it up with some sliced shiso leaf. Because I had already pre-salted this, I'm going to go much lighter on the ponzu sauce. I believe there is a lot of room to play around with tataki. Traditionally speaking, it is paired with a soy citrus type of dipping sauce, but that doesn't go to say that you can't pair it up with something that's seasonal or one of your favorite ingredients. So thanks for watching our video on tataki. If you'd like to see more or taste some of what you had today, come by to Mira Sushi and see me.